Evening everyone. Right, we're going to do Brexit today. I had a little look back actually, and the last time we used one of these streams to discuss anything to do with Brexit. At the start, you know, I say at the start we do something and then we can open it out to general questions. But I think I am going to do a big old Brexit thing today, was because the last time was May and that was quite narrow. And I got caught out. Last week I had a comment on the channel by someone, it was on a Brexit video, and someone said, can you stop talking about Brexit or I'll unsubscribe? And I thought to myself, are you on the right channel at all? And then I thought to myself, have we had a little window where I've not really talked about Brexit in any sense and they just accidentally subscribed in that period? But anyway, so a few things I wanted to do here. It's actually been quite an interesting week for Brexit. I've been sort of saying over the last few weeks, really the last couple of months, there's been a very weird shift in people's attitudes to Brexit. It's not easy to track either, because you would just think, well, there's lots of polls and all the rest of it. The problem with polls for Brexit, there's three types of poll for Brexit, really. The first type is the one that says, is Brexit, and I've tried to put some of them here. I could only get two of them on YouGov. There'll be another one shaking around somewhere. But the first one is it going well or is it going badly? So in terms of I mean, there's various variations on it. The YouGov variation on this is how the government is handling the issue of Brexit, which is not exactly the same thing as how is Brexit going, because you may think Brexit's going badly due to other things. But nonetheless, it shows way more people think Brexit's going badly than going well, or even going well and don't know. It's like 69%, I think that is, think it's going badly. And but you've got to bear in mind that going badly doesn't mean people are now against Brexit, because that will cover the full spectrum. That is from people like myself, who always thought it was going to go badly and thinks that the solution to it is to rejoin, right the way through to people who think that the reason it's going badly is because we didn't do a proper Brexit. We didn't go for the full Singapore on the Thames unicorn Brexit, which doesn't exist, by the way, but they think it does. So these are the people who will say we'd have been better off staying in the like the Nigel Farage group, the people who will say we'd have been better off staying in the EU if we weren't going to do it properly. In other words, our Brexit hasn't been mad enough. So that poll in itself doesn't tell us a massive amount. Then you have the type of Brexit poll that says, do you think the decision was correct or not, which is the one on the bottom. Britons think it was the wrong decision to vote to leave the European Union by 56% to 32%, right? So these are the ones who have Brexit regret. And again, it will include people like, you know, Remainers who never voted to leave in the first place, but it will include people who did vote to leave or didn't vote at all because they didn't care, but think it was the wrong decision. But again, that's in the past. All that really tells you is that these, if we were to have had a confirmatory referendum, would have voted to stay. It doesn't necessarily follow that those people would want to rejoin. But then there are polls, which I've not been able to put up here, which have also shown an increasing number of people saying they would want to rejoin as well. And over the last couple of months, ever since the mini budget really, because that's what blew it out of the water, there's been not a massive, it's not been like a big old spike, but it has been a clear increase. You can sort of see on these graphs where it's also tackling this, a shift, an increase. But there's also been a shift on the way it's been presented to the public as well. And I want to go through an example here, but I'll just try and get some comments before I go on to the next bit, because the next bit could take a little while. Right, I think we've got some general ones here as well. I'm going to try and pick on Brexit ones though. Have I got my pipe? No, my pipe's in my studio, which is where I'd record the videos. I don't really record those here. Can I see Labour's Brexit position changing if floating voters' attitudes start to shift? Yeah, oh yeah. Well, their target voters are driving Labour's Brexit position right now entirely. And you know, and at some point Labour's position will shift. I know people are looking at and going, oh, well, they're saying they're not going to even go back to the single market, let alone the EU. It's not sustainable. I'm not saying they're lying out of hand. You know, what they're talking about is their policies for the next parliament, but for the parliament after, it will have to shift. Of course it will have to shift. You look at where public opinion has gone in the last 2 years. Remember, when we left the EU, it didn't mean a great deal. Because the only thing leaving the EU did was stop us making decisions that affected us on a continental level. Well, we'd already stopped doing that after 2016 anyway. So we were already voluntarily not making decisions as part of the EU. We'd sent ourselves off to the naughty step, and we didn't have to, but we did. So the big change came at the end of 2020 with the exiting of the single market and customs union. So we're talking just under 2 years. And look at how the attitude to Brexit, presented in the media, presented by politicians, viewed by the public, has changed in 2 years. Imagine what it's going to be like in another 4 years, another 6 years. You know, because if you think about the timescale, if you think there's going to be a general election in, say, 1.5 years' time, could be longer, could be short, but it could be 1.5 years' time. So there's another 1.5 years of change to make. Then you've got another 4 years before, if Labour is successful, they want to go to the polls again. So you're talking 5 to 6 years. And it's so much easier for Labour to change their position, because it might sound quite intractable now, but because it's entirely driven by target voters. Whereas if you look at the Conservatives, their Brexit position is dictated by several factors. First of all, yes, target voters. Second of all, the media they rely on that is also pro-Brexit. Third of all, the nutters in their parliamentary party who are pro-Brexit. You've also got the fact many of the most senior Conservative MPs nailed their colours to the mast on Brexit. They are the ones who delivered it. Not just the ones who say, well, now that we're out, we should make the best of it, like Labour are trying to do. The ones who actually forced it through. So you've got all of these things in the Conservative Party, to say nothing of the fact that Conservative Party members are still in favour of Brexit. None of these things apply to Labour. The vast majority of their MPs are against it. The vast majority of their members are against it. The vast majority of their voters are against it. Not all, but a vast majority. You know, if those target voters, that just small, awkward, bloody number of target voters, change their minds, Labour could switch on it no problem at all. And I think, as I say, I think that has to happen. The other thing I keep saying is what I think about Labour's position is the Tories get away with financial mismanagement. I mean, when it's really bad like now, it's a struggle for them. But they sort of get away with the media cover for them. They never cover for Labour. And how, you know, if someone is going to try and tell me that Labour are not going to take us back into the single market just because of what Labour politicians are saying right now, you've got to explain two things to me. First of all, you've got to explain to me how Labour can fire up the economy without going back into the single market. I can't see how they can do that. I can see how what they're proposing will help. I can absolutely see them improving the economic outlook. But in terms of getting our pre-Brexit growth levels back, or capacity for the economy to grow back, where's it coming from? You can't. The EU is always going to be our major export market. If you've got barriers to trade with our major export market where we used to have none, the growth's not there. And Labour will be hammered if they do not get the economy firing on all cylinders. So then the other thing you've got to explain to me, if you can't explain that, you've got to explain to me how it is that Labour are deliberately wanting to lose the election then. Not the next one, but the one after. The next one they can win just by pointing at the fact that the Tories have ruined the economy now and promising to make it better. They can absolutely win it on the back of promises of unicorns. Labour totally can. But they can't win the one afterwards. The one afterwards, they're in power. They have to deliver something tangible. So of course Labour are going to take us back in. It would be madness not to. Because unless someone can come up with some way that Labour can actually compensate for the Brexit trade barriers, but there is no way. I'll go through a few others. Did I watch Caroline Lucas cornering Hunt on the Brexit elephant in the room following his recent budget speech the other day? No, I don't generally watch these things, although I am going to at some point show a clip of a Newsnight thing. It may have been one where Caroline Lucas was present, but she didn't speak in the particular clip I'm going to show. Listen to Churchill's September 17th speech, 1946. I think it's important on how nationalist attitude and that as current social problems. Yes, I mean, Churchill warned about these sort of things as well. They saw it coming. I mean, you've got to bear in mind, this was also round about the time of George Orwell as well, wasn't it? The warnings were there because we'd had our own little brush with fascism, hadn't we, in Britain? People forget that because they never actually took over. You know, in some European countries, they did actually seize power. They didn't in this country, but they were there, and you know, people tried to warn us. And I don't really know whether people listened at the time, but they're certainly not listening now. Keep saying that Labour policy is geared towards rejoining eventually, except you have to do research to know that, and Labour statements are all no rejoining. Yeah, because that's their target voters' position. They don't expect people to go and do their research. And it's a horrible thing to say, but there are people, we know there are people, there'll be people here tonight perhaps, who will say to themselves, I cannot accept this Brexit position. I will effectively allow in the Tories if Labour don't change their Brexit stance. Now, Labour know several things. They know, first of all, there aren't actually that many people. You may think so because their voices are amplified in the echo chambers that we inhabit on social media. But Labour will know the views of their target voters. They will know it's not actually that big a deal. And where these people are in appreciable numbers, they're either in seats that Labour aren't chasing anyway, or they're in the seats where they have massive majorities. And if they lose even 1,000 votes, like they could lose 5,000 votes, it's like we're still going to win the seat. So it's a horrible thing to say that they can take, you know, they can ignore a core part of their vote, but that's unfortunately how you win elections. You have to. But the other thing is, there will be a lot of people like that who don't like that Brexit attitude, who will also recognise that actually if it's a choice between a hard Brexit and a soft Brexit, even if you don't see the direction of travel to rejoining, you're still choosing between a hard Brexit and a soft Brexit, and you'll go for the soft Brexit. Or a softer Brexit. I would still say any Brexit outside the single market and customs union is not soft, but softer. So people will also vote pragmatically, even if and also you've got to bear in mind, the vast majority of people aren't going to make their decisions based on Brexit. So I've got a little graph above my head here, where the green one is, these are issues like how important people think they are. So the economy is at the top. Immigration has massively spiked up here in recent times, the other week, because the immigration rhetoric was ramped up in the media and by the Tories. What you can't easily see on that graph is it spiked up and then straight back down again. It's difficult to see it on that graph. It'll become more obvious in the next couple of weeks. And that just again shows you that what people can think is important is very much led by the media. But you can see the green one, Britain leaving the EU, how important do people think that is? Not really important at all. So it's not going to be an issue, even when people have a definite view on it, it's not going to be the issue that decides people's votes. That's going to be the state of the economy or the state of the NHS or education or, you know, various other issues. I guess PR is the most important reform to keep the Tories out of government. This message just see, that's how I look at it as well. I can't go from that, unfortunately, to Labour are clearly going to introduce PR, because I really don't know if that. The thing is, there isn't very much internal pressure to maintain Brexit in the Labour Party. There are Lexiteers, they're still there, but they're not really in the leadership. The vast majority of Labour MPs are not pro-Brexit. They're not even pro-staying out now that we're out. The vast majority of Labour members are not, and the voters. So there isn't really anything holding Labour against reversing Brexit other than those swing voters that they need to appeal to. But when it comes to proportional representation, it's much messier in Labour. There is clearly a groundswell of opinion that we should adopt it amongst members, but not necessarily amongst their MPs. So that's a tricky one, but I just think I will not thank Labour if they get into power for 10 years, 15 years, doesn't matter what, it won't actually be 15, but you know, round about that, and then lose to the Tories again, who just undo everything because they didn't change the system. I won't thank them because it'll just be like whatever, 12, 13 years of breathing space. That's all it'll be. If we just get another period like the last Labour government, it'll be fine. I was going to say great. It may not be that great in the first few years because the economy's knackered, but it'll be fine while it happens, and then it'll just be gone. It'll just be gone. It'll be like eating a big old cake. It was nice at the time, but now you feel sick and you've got no cake left. That's how I view first past the post, you know. And I've not gone through these lots of periods. I was only born in the 70s, so I've only experienced. I mean, I was alive for a Labour government at the start, but I didn't know about it. I was too young. So I've only experienced one Labour government, but I don't really like this Tory government, Labour government, and then back to Tory government wrecking everything. So yeah, for me, proportional representation is the most important reform by far and away. Certainly some hefty electoral reform. I mean, something's better than nothing, but nothing less than full PR for me is good enough. Do I think the people of the UK will get over their PTSD from the Conservative Party rule such that they'll go back to the Tories if Labour doesn't rejoin the single market? Yeah. I think the election is going to be tighter than some people think. But when I say tighter than some people think, I don't mean Labour can't win a decent majority. The Conservatives won a big majority in 2019, but it was actually quite a tight election. Just the nature of first past the post, it just meant it was quite a tight election. The Tories didn't actually win that many votes, really, compared to the previous election where they lost their majority. And it can often come down to 100 seats and a few thousand votes here or there. You know, and also the Reform UK man, Richard Tice is on again, saying he's already got 550 candidates, and he's gonna put candidates in every seat in Britain. He says everywhere outside Northern Ireland's going to have a Reform UK candidate. He says. I heard that one before I said to him. You know, they said that in 2019 and then backed out. But if they hadn't backed out, Labour would have been in power. Same thing will happen next time. You know, if he actually stands candidates, be interesting to see where he stands them. If he actually stands them in all non-Northern Irish seats, that'll help Labour. But then what if their Reform UK just fails or fizzles into, you know, like a fart in the wind, just disappears? Then for the following election, it could be weird again. All sorts of things can happen. Labour's lead at the moment is not, I think they are going to win, but the reason why I think they're going to win is because, first of all, I think they are laser focused on winning, almost to the exclusion of everything else. I think they sometimes can be a little bit blinkered about it, but at the same time, I'd rather that than too complacent. And Rishi Sunak isn't good enough. He's not a good enough, he's not a canny enough politician. And even if he's surrounded himself with good advisors, and I see no evidence that he has done, by the way, I've seen no evidence that he's surrounded himself with good strategists. But even if he did, I just don't think he's good enough. And the fact that he's now stopping his ministers attending the morning interview rounds, I just think to myself, so what's he going to be like come the general election when ministers are going to have to do interviews? There's no getting out of it. But anyway, apart from EFTA, there aren't any other options for non-members to access a single market, you don't have to be EFTA, but you will have to be part of the EEA basically. EFTA members don't want the UK as a member. Yeah, the UK economy, you're right, and this is what I try and say to people. EFTA, it won't make sense for EFTA to want the UK to join. The UK is too large an economy, but that also means we could get our own deal. That's the same thing. the UK economy is larger than all the EFTA members put together. So, you know, we could negotiate exactly the same thing. All to get, and the single market is actually quite straightforward. The only stumbling block to it at the moment is this nebulous opposition to freedom of movement. That's the only thing blocking it. You notice it's the only reason why Labour give for not going back to the single market. They don't cite any other issues with it. The Tories don't cite any other issues with it. When it comes to rejoining the single market, because remember, rejoining the single market, you can't do it without accepting all the rules. You have to accept, you don't just get to pick and choose which rules. It's not like rejoining the EU where there is a negotiation to it. You know, if you want to join the single market under any sort of deal, you are going to be following all the rules. That is non-negotiable. It can't be negotiable. It's not, you know, just that's a red line for the EU. The single market doesn't work if you don't follow those rules. So that's a given. And yet out of all these rules, the only thing that anyone can come up with to complain about is freedom of movement. So as soon as you knock that on the head, there's no barrier to rejoining the single market. So that's it. Say PR is a must. I was born in the 70s and this constant destruction of state by Tories is a problem. They wreck very efficiently. Well, it's much easier to destroy than it is to build. Anything, doesn't matter what it is. You can watch some fella build a wall all day, then you get a £15 mallet and smash it into pieces in no time. I know, because I have done this before. PR sounds great, also could encourage right-wing parties to become more involved. Remember in 2015, 3 million people voted for UKIP. Oh yeah, we'd get UKIP and Reform UK MPs, no problem. They will be sat on the back benches. But this is why I am opposed to half measures. Because you look at Italy and you could say to yourself, well, Italy, it didn't stop Italy getting the far right into power, did it? They don't have proper proportional representation. And if you half-arse it, there is a real worry of that. There is a danger. But if you have full proportional representation, when I said full proportional representation, I mean a system whereby if a party gets 40% of the vote, it will get 40% of the MPs. 25% of the vote, 25% of the MPs. I want it to match almost exactly. If it does, you will keep them out of power. Because people in this country are not actually fascists. You know, the population are not actually fascists. They're not going to go along with fascism. You know, they're moderates. But anyway, maybe Rishi will go hide in a fridge. Well, he already has done. He's gone to hide in Ukraine at the moment. I say at the moment, he was there earlier today. I don't know whether he's still there. PR lets in hardcore loonies on left and right, but that's a price you pay for overall stability. And the current Tory party is a lot of right-wing loonies anyway. Well, yeah, I mean, the Tory party at the moment is very much under the sway of the far right. I'm not saying the far right have got control now. They seem to have lost a bit of control, but they are still, they can't be ignored. There was a time when they were ignored, but they can't be now. They're too big and too powerful. But anyway, like I said this morning, the whisper from Hunter, a key indicator. Yeah, I mean, bear in mind, the clear majority of MPs, it's very difficult to say now for Tory MPs, because there was that big influx of Tory MPs in 2019, and it's very difficult for us to know where they really stand on Brexit, because all of them were new MPs in 2019, so we don't know what their positions on Brexit were beforehand. We know that all of them had to commit to a hard Brexit in 2019. That was the condition for being a candidate. But we don't know how many of them really felt that. And we don't know how many of them, even if they did feel that, since becoming MPs, since seeing Brexit, might have changed their minds. But we can certainly see that a majority of MPs are not awfully keen on the idea of restricting the capacity for our economy to grow. Wait until the old Tory supporters pass on. Well, I mean, we can't just wait around. But I mean, that's naturally happening anyway. We're not so much Tory supporters as Brexit supporters. Because Because the thing is about like, you know, as people get older, like a lot of them naturally gravitate towards the Tories because the Tory media is very good at striking fear into them, the fear of muggings and all the rest of it, and raids on their pension part, and you know, demands on public services. And and the Tories are very good at targeting what sounds like nice policies for them, but it never is. Whereas with Brexit, it's got nothing to do with age as such, just the time when people were around. You know, the reason why most Brexit voters were elderly wasn't because as you get older, you naturally get more xenophobic or Eurosceptic or anything. It was just because they were old, they were of the age where they could remember before we joined the EC, and they had rose tinted glasses, and they were looking back with nostalgia. Oh, we were all right then. We weren't all right then. What they were remembering is when they were all right then, when they were young. And everyone thinks, you know, this is why everyone thinks the time they grew up was brilliant, even if it was terrible. It's not that the time was brilliant, it's that you were young, fit, you know, healthy, your life ahead of you, full of hopes and dreams and ambitions. And that's what you're remembering. And people will associate what was going on in society at the time and think that somehow that was all great when it wasn't. So as the people at my age gets towards 60s and 70s, we're not going to suddenly turn into Brexiteers because we've got no fear of the EU. We grew up in it. It was great. Seeing peeved that some of us will let a Tory government in because of Labour's Brexit position may also say we're not important because Labour doesn't need our votes. Contradictory, isn't it? No, because Labour are playing the percentages on it, as any party that wants to win power has to do. So if you think about, so let's say Labour need to target about 13, 14 million votes. Obviously they need to be in the right places, but overall, let's say Labour get about 13, 14 million votes at the next election. There are 13 or 14 million people with their own thoughts, with their own ideas about what's good, what's not. Labour cannot possibly appeal to them all. You would go mad. You can't appeal to them all. So the only way to win is you have to accept that the vast majority of those 13 or 14 million people will vote for you anyway. So Labour can probably, if they're aiming for 14 million votes, they can probably count on about 13 million votes without them to do anything. 13 million people who will vote Labour because they always vote Labour, or because they always vote against the Tories and the Labour candidate in their area is the best place to replace them, or because they're a swing voter, but right now it's not a clever time to be voting Tory. So again, they will vote tactically to get rid of whichever, to back whichever candidate is best placed to fight the Tories. So Labour will say, right, for those reasons, there's like 30 million in the bag. So they chase like a million. And I don't think they're even chasing a million. I think half of that is probably more realistic. But you have to, there's no other way around it. How can you chase 14 million or 13.5 million, say, individual people, all with their own, and you know how people are, we know how people are. People will have this idea, you've got to do this to run the country properly, this is the way to do it. And if you just deviate a little, if you say, all right, well, let's just change it a little bit, no, change it, it's too important, it has to be this, it has to be the whole thing. If you start taking bits off, it doesn't work. You know, that's how people are. You can't, you drive yourself mad trying to appeal to everyone. So you have to take votes for granted. There's no other practical strategy. But anyway, right, I'm going to go with something else now, because I don't know whether people have seen this. I don't watch television, so I only ever see these things as clips myself. So I don't want to read too much into it. I'm going to need my headphones. But I'm going to show a clip from Newsnight, which had, and I'm going to go through various bits because it had lots of points of interest in it. And it was 2 questions, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it when I start it up. I just want to go over this, so let's have a look.
I'm going to start talking about rejoining the single market.
So first of all, can people hear that? Is that loud enough? Because otherwise I'm a bit knackered because that's at full volume. So she's just asked, you know, isn't it about time we started rejoining the single market? I'll assume yes.
Very quickly answer that, Victoria, before I move on.
So, as I say, Germany, Italy and other countries in Europe are facing higher inflation than we are. The United States...
And higher growth than we are.
Right, I'm going to keep stopping it. I'm going to do a teacher thing where I keep stopping it to explain a bit. So, what's happened here? Good. What's happened here? The lady's asked about that. The Tory MP has tried to fire back saying, oh, actually, there's higher inflation in these other countries. Generally, there's not, but in the odd one there is. And this was really weird. Fiona Bruce. Now, as I say, I don't watch all of these, but Fiona Bruce in the past has often shut down Brexit arguments or allowed people to talk crap in them. Fiona Bruce herself put in there and higher growth, and that's the thing that people need to remember when you're comparing inflation. You should think about it as, so if a country has 10% inflation, but if it also has 10%, no one has 10% growth, but if it did have 10% growth, then actually it cancels out the inflation. Because as the country, obviously individuals don't always share in that growth. But in theory, if your cost of living goes up by 10%, but your income goes up by 10%, it's just the same. So obviously no countries have got growth that's equal to their inflation at the moment, but there are countries where they've got similar levels of inflation, but the country... So like when she's saying Germany and Italy, they've got much higher growth than we have. So the net effect, the difference between the inflation and the growth, which you might call real inflation, I mean, economists probably have a word for it, but let's call it real inflation or real terms inflation, is much higher for the UK than it is other comparable economies. And I thought it was really interesting, Fiona Bruce throwing that out. I mean, obviously this lady wasn't impressed herself, and she nods when Fiona Bruce says that. But I'll carry on playing it a little bit long because there's quite a lot of interesting stuff here.
I'm not sure that's
well, we
correct.
are the only economy in the G7 to have a smaller economy than before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so, next, I'm going to keep stopping it, sorry. Next thing, so Fiona Bruce, again, adding in the fact that this was on the BBC that week as well. We are the only country that has a smaller economy, or advanced economy, that has a smaller economy than before Brexit and COVID. So from 2019. And you can see this Tory MP, she's trying to sort of deny it, but she's not getting away with it. So what she actually does is just to ignore it.
The reason we're having to take these steps now is because we absolutely need to address some of these international factors that we are seeing.
Well, what the lady there saying is about Brexit.
But with Brexit, I mean, that, that happened 6 years ago. The referendum result was 6 years ago. I think we just got to look forward. We've left the EU. It was in accordance with the referendum. And as I say, the fact that other countries are facing these same pressures suggests that there are factors. And indeed, the OBR has set out that it's international headwinds that we are facing that are causing these problems that are having impacts for us here at home.
Let me take another question. Yes, the man there in the blue sweater.
So before I go to that one there, so again, she just had to ignore it and then go on, and they're going to keep sticking to these international pressures thing. But the problem is we've already started to see even the BBC, and the BBC is massive because, you look at the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Telegraph, all the rest of it have got a really large spread, they get a lot of circulation together. But the BBC is way higher. The BBC gets its message out to way more people. And more importantly, it's seen as more credible. So when the BBC starts showing simple charts, I'm going to show another one in a minute that they actually got wrong, showing simple charts that basically say UK buggered, then there we go. Let's have a little look. So there's any more comments before I go through the next bit, because the next bit's a totally different person asking a question. Have Labour ever approached me to provide consultancy? No. They won't even respond to me when I'm trying to explain to them how they could improve their social media presence, which is the only thing they ought to listen to me about anyway. We've got to look forward. Well, that was the thing, yeah, that got to look forward statement. So if I was, I mean, obviously the woman can't just keep firing, shouting things out, be rude. But you would say at that point, rejoining the single market could be looking forward. You know, all right, let's look forward to the time when we rejoin the single market, because clearly we need to. But as I say, volume on the link's bad. What is that, my personal volume or just the video? Because if it's the video, I'd already had to increase the volume of it. That was just me taking a clip of it, that's all. Yeah, the BBC still has members of the IEA for comments of the. Oh yeah, I'm not saying that the BBC has suddenly decided to become, you know, a credible organisation again. Or well, bear in mind, the BBC whole is a very good organisation. I mean, the political news. To bear in mind, the political news team is a very, very small part of the organisation, but it is the one that lets the side down. But at the same time, nonetheless, the fact that the BBC are now starting to report some more facts about Brexit is an indicator that the pressures that were placed on their correspondents to avoid it are now dissolving a little bit. And as I say, think about it. Oh, video volume, sorry. Okay. Well, maybe I don't need to play the next bit anyway. I could leave that because it's not that vital. I mostly wanted to go over how, you know, because that was an example there, because never mind the exchange between the Tory MP and the shall I put the next one up? Oh, I'll do this next one in a minute. The Tory MP and the audience member, because that might happen anytime. It was the fact that Fiona Bruce was basically speaking up for the audience member and challenging. I mean, we had a BBC presenter challenging the it's not Brexit narrative, which, as I say, I don't watch these things. I only ever see clips that people think are interesting enough to post on Twitter. But to me, that sounds different. I've not seen a clip where that's happened before. Usually I'm used to seeing these interviews or clips of interviews or things like this where the BBC just allows the Brexit bullshit to come out. But anyway. How would I fix the BBC to make sure the government can't threaten to take away the TV licence? It is really difficult, because that's the thing when you talk about things being independent. You know, lots of things are independent, but if they're publicly funded, the government can lean on them. The only way I could think of is if you took certain, like if you had much greater devolution of the UK. So instead of Westminster being at the top of a pile of devolved powers beneath it, if Westminster was only dealing with genuinely national and international issues, so then things like the BBC were overseen by a board that was comprised of governments of devolved parts of the UK, maybe then it would also be more reflective as well. I mean, there is I think a very genuine criticism of the BBC News that it is often too London centric. You know, some people in Scotland argue it's like too focused on England. As someone who lives in the sort of North Midlands, I would say I think it is London centric, because I don't feel that it represents where I live either. So maybe that you take it away from Westminster, or that you have some sort of system of different devolved governments all having a seat at the table, so that it wouldn't be possible for Westminster to overrule them. We have a Brexiteer with qualifications asking something. Well, I don't wish to be rude, but you know, when someone says that an economist, or they've got a master's in economics, I mean, my partner has qualifications in economics, and you could say, well, they're more qualified than I am on economics, but are they as qualified as a professor on economics? And then it's a case of going, oh, well, Professor Patrick Minford's a professor in economics, and he said that Brexit would provide an immediate boost to GDP. Oh, well, it didn't do, so he's wrong. And then other professors of economics, like literally every single one, has said, no, this will actually damage the economy, reduce the GDP. And that's what's happened. And those economists are still saying, yeah, it's all in line with what we expected. So it is one of those things. And it's actually relatively easy to find professors of economics to talk about Brexit because they want to talk about Brexit. And I'm trying again, RE contradiction. I've argued persuasively that parties are only interested in views of floating voters, so it behoves all of us to be floating voters on whose vote is contingent on policies. The problem, well, you can try, but that means voting Tory on an alternating basis. So it means bringing in Tory governments. It's the only way to identify yourself as a floating voter. You have to keep voting for the devil. Now, the fact is, look, you know, political parties have to understand, they have to know what is the way to get power. Now, I can take this off now because I'm not using that anymore. I don't like talking that on. I don't think that, you know, any party is necessarily going, you know, oh, and we have to dance to the tune of this small number of people. All of them want to do something for wider voters as well, or the genuine politicians, that is. But again, there is a way to win elections and there's a way to lose them. And the way to lose them is to ignore those voters who will vote for you under certain conditions. And you need to know where they are as well. Because like I say, it may well be, if you think about the voters that Labour are chasing, right? So these ones who don't, and it's not that they're pro-Brexit, by the way. Some of them may be. But it's not that Labour are chasing after the pro-Brexit vote. If they were chasing after the pro-Brexit vote, they wouldn't be putting in their Brexit reversal policies. I know they're only partially reversing this at the moment. They are targeting the voters who know that Brexit's a bad idea, but think that going back is going to be too difficult and take too much attention away from the important issues and create more... And I keep saying this, I can't emphasize enough just how damaging this has been to a lot of, not everyone's, but a lot of people's friendships and family relationships. This has actually split families apart. You know, there are people who cannot have conversations with their parents or their siblings because of Brexit. And they don't want that back. You know, it's like with it being in the past, it's like they can move on and just agree not to talk about it anymore. Like my partner and her mum. And I can't, you know, sufficiently emphasise the fear that a lot of people have. And Labour are aware of that. Say Professor Richard Murphy is good with economics. He's good with economics, but he's very bad with politics, though. Which is weird, because economists should be very good at politics. But anyway. So, yeah, so that's where Labour have to focus. So that's who they're focusing on. But at some point, those people will realise, or more to put it another way, what we're waiting for is for those people's families and friendships to not be put at jeopardy by talking about, say, freedom of movement. You know, we're waiting for a time when all the people who argued for Brexit suddenly go, well, I didn't mean this Brexit. I didn't mean this Brexit. Oh no, I'm fine with single market. I was never against the single market. As soon as we get to that point, oh, we can go back into the single market. And as I say, if you look at the direction of travel of British public opinion and even media reporting in the last 2 years, and you can't extrapolate it because it goes up and down, these things, but you, like in 2 more years' time, we're not going to still be in the same place. We're going to have moved on again. And where we're going to be moving to is, we should be in the single market. So, although I'm not going to hold out any hope that Labour will fundamentally change their offer for the manifesto for the next election, if public opinion shifts, the public opinion of the key voters shifts significantly between now and then, they easily can. Nothing to stop them. Until the manifesto is published, there's nothing that they can't change. How do you target voters without having mass data on those people? You collect the data. You poll them. You survey them. You know, when we look at polls, so I'm going to have to go back to this one, aren't I? When we look at polls like this, they give us a national picture. Labour will be doing it for their target seats, and they'll be doing the same thing. You know, and what you can see here is on these YouGov polls. So these are quite good. All of, well, the two at the top, because you can see there's filters on them. I haven't applied any of the filters, but you can apply filters. So, and Labour can do the same thing. They will be targeting very, well, they will be targeting very carefully those voters. Now, I cannot say with absolute certainty that their analysis of the polling data is accurate. It may be that they're getting something wrong. That would be pretty terrible. But given the, and I mean, I have said in the past that when it comes to Labour's Brexit stuff, so when they started saying no freedom of movement, and I was like, I don't like that. Or when they said make Brexit work, and I thought, well, I'm not sure about that either. And I said this a bit, and it was because I was worried that Labour might be nailing their colours to some mast. I was worried that they might be saying something that in a couple of years public opinion changes and they'll find it difficult to shift. Now, the only reason I still have those fears that Labour may be saying things that maybe if they said the same thing in a way that wasn't as committed, you know, like when people often pick on the Keir Starmer saying there's no case for rejoining the single market, and you naturally go, well, actually there's loads of cases for joining the single market. But something like that's not committal. You're not saying we're not going back into the single market. You're just saying, no, I'm not sure that that's really needed. If it was that sort of thing, I'd be less worried. It's when we are definitely not going back into the single market. And it's like, it's a bit too definite, that. The only reason I haven't said that recently is because Labour are doing quite well in the polls. And you know, and I know people will say, well, that's largely because the Conservatives are imploding. The Conservatives also imploded in 2019, and yet Labour did as well. Whereas this time, the Conservatives are imploding and Labour are the beneficiaries. Their poll rating is going up. So I can't, in all good conscience, seriously entertain the notion that Labour are messing up the analysis of their own internal polling while they are doing well in the polls, because they have to be doing something right. It's not a case of Tories lose credibility, Labour naturally inherits that credibility. That's not how it works. It's not how it worked in 2019. It's not enough for the party of government to fail. The credible party of opposition has to show that they would succeed where they failed. Otherwise you end up with 2019 again. Hi, I just thought you'd get a question now. Watch this. Blah, blah, blah. Ari, Jeremy Hunt's budget, would I say it's good or bad overall? It's terrible overall because it's unnecessary. He didn't have to do that. Even within Tory, you've got to bear in mind a lot of Tory MPs don't like it. You know, he didn't have to raise the taxes of ordinary workers. The windfall tax, it's not even against Tory party ideology. Like Tory MPs, who amongst them would have criticised him raising much more from windfall taxes? Really? That wouldn't have caused a stink. Who is that upsetting? It's an absolute madness to me. An absolute madness. There was no need for it. Even given that the Conservatives will obviously not come up with a budget response like Labour would. Even though, was it the Daily Mail who said it was basically a Labour budget? It's like ridiculous. But even given that obviously the Tories are not going to come up with the budget that I think would be better, or the one that Labour would do, even within their thinking, it was still a terrible budget. I mean, it's everything's bad about it. It's not only going to hurt the most vulnerable, which they don't care about, but look what it's including. They're going to put up fuel duty next year. What? Put up fuel duty? And more, by more than they put it down this year. Earlier this year, they reduced it by 5%. They're going to put it up, I can't remember what it was now, but it's going to be put up way more than that next year. and there's so many things they're doing that's going to hurt them when it comes to their target voters. You know, they even had to have the Daily, I think it was the Daily Express. I get these, I sometimes forget which dingbat said it, trying to say, oh, don't worry about the interest rates, it'll mean your savings earn more interest. You know, again, that purely targeted at older, relatively well-off voters who, yes, are the Tories' most important customers, but it's still not going to help them if they're thinking, well, okay, yeah, I'll make a little bit on my savings, but my kids are going to be paying way more on their mortgage. Keir Starmer plans to abolish the House of Lords and replace it with a new elected chamber in order to restore trust in politics, according to the Observer. Oh, is that for tomorrow? I mean, we sort of knew that Keir Starmer is very much not in favour of the current House of Lords model. That'd be good. I shall enjoy that. I have at times stood up for the House of Lords, I have to say. I have, you know, it's one of those things where I don't like the idea of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Obviously, having an unelected chamber is not... See, when it purely existed as a chamber to scrutinise things, and when the chamber was largely made up of legal experts, experts in business, trade unionists, and former politicians, that's mostly who ends up in the House of Lords. So people who sort of have some understanding of how to scrutinise legislation. And when that's what its job was, I was fine with it. I'm not saying, you know, I was fine with it. The problem now is that we keep sort of hoping the House of Lords is going to apply the brakes to a wildly out of control authoritarian group of fascists. And you can't expect that of an unelected chamber. So that'd be good. Is that in now? Or do I have to wait till tomorrow? Oh no, it is. Yeah, it's in there. Hey, good. Because that's, as I said, I mean, they could even use it to troll Nadine Dorries, couldn't they? Because Nadine Dorries is being elevated to the House of Lords, but she's deferred it until after the election. So Labour could troll her on that one, couldn't they? They could go, oh, you're going to be a baroness after the next election. You'll have about 12 months, enjoy, before you're kicked out with your ermine and everything. Do I think the Tories have embarked on a policy of scorched earth? Well, you would think so. Now, let me show this other graph. Now, the reason I'm going to show this other graph, because when I was talking about the BBC and how they're now presenting things a little bit better, here's an example. Now, this is the graphic from Full Fact, which shows how they've cocked something up. So this is a graph that's supposed to be explaining the government's spending decisions. So basically, the red here basically means massive borrowing, effectively, because it's the cost to us. Now, Full Fact had several issues with this. I'm going to go over them in a minute, but just to highlight, because roughly it's right. So yeah, you've got 2 years of massive borrowing, and then you'll notice from the year 2024 to 2025 onwards, for the next 4 years, payback time. So basically what they're saying is we're going to borrow massive amounts of money, and after we win the election, we will then start to pay it back. At which point you go, yeah, but Labour are going to win the next election. So what you mean is you're going to do massive amounts of borrowing and expect Labour to pay it back. That's what you actually mean. But the reason why I put this one up here, just to show that the BBC are still getting things wrong, but also to show how sometimes they may get them accidentally wrong, and it's not always malicious. So, okay, there's some actual errors here. First of all, the y-axis was labelled in millions, not billions, and they got this number wrong. But that's fine because, well, it's not fine, but you know, the editorial process still broke down. But nonetheless, the BBC acknowledged it and went, yeah, okay, fair enough. But I'll tell you what was weird. Full Fact also complained about the inconsistent y-axis scaling. And the BBC said, we failed to spot an error relating to interval spacing We understand the importance for accuracy and spacing being identical on charts. It's like, how could you fail to spot it? Look at this, right? On the top, you've got 0 to 5, so that represents 5 billion. But then this represents 10 billion. And then all the others up here represent 10 billion. So it's inconsistent. But on below, it's even worse. So this one represents 5 billion. But then the next one represents 15 billion. The next one represents 20 billion. And then this one represents 10 billion. It's all over the place. And the upshot of it is, this red bar here, actually I'm not pointing with anything, my cursor doesn't show. This red bar here should be roughly the same size, should actually be exactly the same size, but it should be roughly the same size as this bar here. But this bar here looks bigger than this one. So it is actually misleading because you don't have a consistent scale. The fact that they could highlight this to the BBC and the BBC, and also I will say this, the fact that this figure here is wrong is a mistake. Someone just probably typed the wrong number in. The fact that this says millions, not billions, that's just a mistake. Yes, it should have been picked up, but it's a mistake. This scaling is not a mistake. There is no way to make that mistake. It's deliberate. And the fact that when you point it out to the BBC, that they actually say, sorry, we can't see a problem, is ridiculous to me. So there are still ways in which the BBC can still be playing silly buggers, and some of it may be genuinely accidental and some of it not. Will I be watching any of the World Cup? No, I'm not. No, I can't. It's beyond the pale for me, this. I did agonise over the last World Cup. I didn't. Neither Russia nor Qatar, neither of them should have been in the World Cup. Neither of them. You've got to bear in mind, you know, when we went to the last World Cup, Russia had already invaded Ukraine. It had invaded other countries as well when it was awarded it. The Russian state had killed people in Britain and attempted to kill other people in Britain. And at the time, I ummed and ahed about it, and I thought, we're not opposed to the Russian people, this is the Russian state. And I sort of felt that although it shouldn't have been awarded to Russia, but it had, and at the same time, you know, I didn't want to feel that I was opposed to the entire Russian. This time it's completely, first of all, by the way, I also now don't think that was, it was very finely balanced, and I think I was actually wrong anyway. Because I'll tell you what I notice. If you look at the way Iran is treating its protesters, and then, and I don't know whether I'm just missing, maybe I'm just missing reports, but I've seen reports of significant Iranian protests outside of Iran. So Iranian communities in different countries protesting against the way the Iranian government is treating protesters. I haven't seen significant protests. I've seen individual Russian immigrants in other countries. I haven't seen organised protests, Russian protests against the invasion of Ukraine around the world. And I just think to myself, why is that? Why is it that Iranians around the world can protest at their own government's behaviour? And why is it that or at least I'm not seeing reports of Russians protesting against the behaviour of their government? But anyway, but Qatar is just, everything about it's wrong. Everything. It was awarded corruptly. The Qatari government is out. But you'll be watching it and thinking, I wonder how many slaves died to build this stadium. Or you'll be watching these people moaning that they can't get any beer now. And it's like, you were going to be served your beer by a slave. Do you not have the problem with that? So I actually have no sympathy for the people who've bought tickets to go to Qatar to watch their team either. None at all. You were going to a place to sit in a stadium built by slaves, some of whom died, and you were going to get your pie, and you probably won't get pie and chips, but whatever they were going to serve you for food and drink by slaves. You were going to be, well, I don't understand why people would be comfortable with that. So I can't, in all good conscience, watch it at all. I won't watch a single match. And I don't agree with anyone. I I've no beef with the players or the management at all, but anyone, and we all know who they are, anyone who goes over there to do the commentary on it that's not contractually obliged to do so. I can understand people under contract like Gary Lineker or, you know, whoever works for Sky Sports or whatever. People who are under contract to go and do it, okay. People who've chosen to do it as a one-off, no. I'm not going to defend that either. But anyway, oh, someone actually say we're going to deport a protesting Russian back to Russia. Yeah, I suppose that might be a reason not to protest in this country. Although I don't think even the UK government would do that. They don't mind locking UK citizens up, but they probably won't do it with the Russian. But anyway, right, let's try and go through just some of the last ones because we're sort of running out of time. I didn't quite get through everything I wanted to, unfortunately. Yeah, someone saying about the graph, you need to go out your way to have inconsistent intervals. Yeah, no program for producing graphs, not a single one, will naturally do that. You have to force it. There was Iranian protests in London against the treatment of the protesters in Iran. I have seen Iranian protests in various countries, in large enough numbers to make the news. And this is why I say maybe I've just missed reports. I can't rule it out, but I haven't seen any. I've seen individual Russians protesting against the war in Ukraine. I haven't seen large demonstrations. But anyway. I missed a question, have I? No, I'll read it out now. Apparently it was the largest increase to benefits or pensions since 1991, and then the Tories won in 1992, trying that trick again. Possibly. I mean, the problem is, of course, when you talk about largest increase for so long, it usually comes on the back of several years of making it lower in real terms. But it's... I just think these are the tricks that do usually work, by the way. Absolutely. Squeeze people and during most of the parliament, and then in the last year or so, loosen the purse strings, make out that, oh, we had these tough times. It wasn't our fault, but we had these tough times. We fixed them, and now it's plain sailing from now on in. Oh, but you have to vote for us, because if you vote for Labour, it'll all end. And, you know, absolutely that is the Tory trick. I just think it's too far gone this time. Labour are now reasonably well organised. Brexit is their main trip hazard, admittedly. You know, it is their main trip hazard. But in general terms, they are very well organised. They even have their Brexit position probably well organised. It's just an unfortunate one. And the Conservatives aren't. It's not just that they've got their record of abject failure for too long, and that after a certain amount of time people naturally start thinking of a change of government anyway. I mean, by the time we get to the next election, it will have been 14 years. If the election is in May 2024, it'll have been 14 years. 14 years. Absolutely the time when people start to think about someone else. And Labour are presenting themselves as that someone else. So the Tories have got it to get up against them. And Rishi Sunak is not effective. He's not an effective politician. He is, you know, he's saner, he's calmer than the others. He won't bring the personal scandals, but his cabinet seem to be bringing enough scandals of their own. You know, we've now got the Dominic Raab one. That's not going to go away. There'll be more of that. You say Starmer's the Tory wannabe to me, I'll trust him as well. There's no such thing as a Tory wannabe in the Labour Party because it doesn't make sense. If you want to be a Tory, you join the Tory Party because you will win most of the time. You know, I could more understand someone in the Tory Party sort of identifying more with Labour but choosing to be a Tory candidate because you're more likely to win. If you want to be an MP, you've got a much better chance as a Tory. It doesn't make any sense the other way around. Even if you lived in the middle of the Labour heartland, you would just move somewhere else. because you've got a much easier job. And quite frankly, in the Labour heartland, you don't really get away with even being close to the centre. So no, there's absolutely nothing, no such thing as blue Labour or a red Tory, however you want to describe it, because it doesn't make sense, doesn't make strategic sense. You say Hunter's pulled the rug from under Labour. He wants to realign, which I think was Labour's plan. But I don't think, I mean, Labour do have to be careful, don't get me wrong. But first of all, Jeremy Hunt, although he said what he said, the Tories do not look like they will go as far as Labour will. And if they did, the only reason they'd be able to do that is because that's where target voters are. Labour will just shift a little bit more, won't they? They'll just shift a bit more. Labour can easily shift their position. Although this no single market, no freedom of movement, no rejoin the EU seems pretty definite, it's all easily changed. There's no barrier to the Labour leadership changing it other than electoral strategy. That's it. If electoral strategy dictated that Labour needed to say, right, we need to at least rejoin the single market, the parliamentary party wouldn't stop him. The members wouldn't rage against it. You know, the affiliated unions wouldn't rage against it. Voters, you know, are the key thing here. How will the voters react? That's all there is to it. But anyway, last one then. Will failing print media readership numbers negatively affect the Tories? I'm not sure, because although yes, the print media circulation goes down, I don't know what they're like online. You know, they have a large online presence. Much of it's free. The Daily Mail they do have a subscription thing, and some of the articles are behind that, but a lot of their gammon news is free on the website. Same, I think, with the Telegraph. I do have subscriptions to quite a lot of papers just to be able to read their articles. I don't for the Daily Mail or the Daily Express. So their gammon news is freely available there. So I don't know what that circulation's like. So we can't just go by the print numbers. They have an online presence as well. So it may not be that big an issue for the Tories. But anyway, we'll have to call it there. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. We will be back on again next week, as far as I know. Have a good evening, and until next time, I'll see you later.